So if you lose your job tomorrow, your brain is, it's going to try to convince you of a really dangerous lie.
Oh, absolutely. The biggest lie.
Right. It'll tell you with absolute, completely unwavering certainty that losing your livelihood is the direct, unmediated cause of that, that suffocating panic you feel in your chest.
Yeah, the logic seems flawless to us in the moment. The event happened, therefore the suffering just arrives.
Exactly. But there's this obscure paper published this week that basically argues that the event, the firing, the divorce, the betrayal has absolutely nothing to do with your emotional destruction.
Which is a wild thing to wrap your head around at first.
It really is. So today we are taking a deep dive into what is essentially the lost operating system of the human mind. It's a system that suggests we are entirely responsible for our own misery, and by extension, we're entirely capable of our own cure.
Yeah, and this premise, it completely upends the fundamental way modern society treats emotional pain right now.
Oh, 100%.
Because we've been conditioned to always look for the external cause, or like the biological misfire. We track our symptoms on apps. We search for specific chemical imbalances.
Or we just endlessly dissect our childhoods. Looking for that one original wound.
Right, exactly. But the stack of notes we're looking at today, this April 2026 technical note from Professor Hisataka Takasugi at the Takasugi Research Institute in Tokyo, it forces us to look in a much more uncomfortable direction.
Yeah, right in the mirror, basically.
Pretty much. It points directly at our own active, present-day philosophy of life. His paper's called The Elegant Solution Revisited, REBT's Philosophical Edge in Contemporary Practice. And it examines a modality that treats psychological disturbance not as a medical disease, but as a philosophical failure.
A philosophical failure. I love that phrasing. And that modality is Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, or REBT, which was created by Albert Ellis back in the 1950s.
Yeah, the 1950s. A long time ago, but more relevant now than ever.
For sure. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically strip away decades of clinical jargon and get down to the bedrock of what Ellis actually built. Because, he didn't just build a therapy.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He built a comprehensive system of living.
Right. He synthesized ancient Stoicism, the linguistic precision of general semantics, and the detachment of Buddhism into this framework that is, frankly, actively being erased by the modern mental health industry today.
It really is. Which is a tragedy.
So we're going to explore why our REBT is at risk of being watered down into just generic symptom management, and why reclaiming its explicit, unapologetic philosophical edge is kind of the only way to genuinely inoculate yourself against the chaos of modern life.
And the stakes here, for you listening, they're incredibly high. Professor Takasugi's main argument is that without a coherent, explicit philosophy of life, human beings just default to dysfunctional ones.
Wait, so you're saying you can't just be neutral?
No, exactly. You don't get to opt out of having a worldview. You either consciously construct a rational one, or you unconsciously absorb all the irrational demands of the culture around you.
Man, that hits hard.
It does. So we're going to break down the mechanics of how that unconscious absorption happens, and more importantly, how the specific architecture of REBT allows you to actually rewrite your internal code.
Okay, let's get into it. So, we all know the standard Freudian playbook that totally dominated the mid-20th century.
Oh yeah, the obsession with unconscious determinism.
Right, the idea that you are essentially a hostage in the trunk of a car driven by your repressed childhood conflicts.
It's a bleak view, honestly.
It really is. But Ellis's rebellion in the 50s, it wasn't just him rejecting the past, right? He fundamentally shifted the locus of control to conscious, present-day responsibility.
He did. Because he realized the profound inefficiency of the psychoanalytic model. Think about it. You could spend 5 years on a couch gaining crystal clear intellectual insight into the fact that your fear of authority stems from, say, a hypercritical father.
Right. I figured it out.
Yeah. But insight does not equal change. The patient would literally stand up from the couch, understand their past perfectly, and still have a massive panic attack in the boardroom the next day.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge problem.
Because Ellis recognized that humans aren't just victims of their history. They are active, present-day participants in their own suffering. They are currently maintaining the disturbance through active, ongoing self-indoctrination.
Self-indoctrination. So we're literally brainwashing ourselves every single day.
Every single day. And the engine of that self-indoctrination is what Ellis formalized in his famous ABC model.
Okay, yes. Let's unpack the ABC model, because we referenced that illusion of A causes C earlier, right? The activating event, which is A, like getting passed over for a promotion, it seems to directly cause C, the emotional consequence of severe depression.
It seems like it, yeah. But the missing variable is B, the belief system.
Okay, walk us through that.
So the activating event is just data. The universe produces an outcome, you didn't get the job, that is A. The emotional consequence, C, is the output. But the data has to be processed through a filter first, and that filter is B.
So B is the translator.
Exactly. If your belief system operates on the premise, I was rejected, which is highly unfortunate, and I will need to improve my skills, the output is disappointment and motivation.
Which is totally healthy.
Right. But if the belief system operates on the premise, I was rejected, which proves I am fundamentally incompetent and will never succeed in anything, the output is paralyzing depression.
Oh, wow. So the environment doesn't dictate the emotion at all. The evaluation of the environment dictates the emotion.
Precisely. Which sounds incredibly empowering, right?
Yeah, it does, until you realize, like Takasugi points out, how aggressively the modern clinical landscape is trying to strip that philosophical empowerment away.
Yeah, Takasugi calls this modern crisis homogenization.
Homogenization? Like milk.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
REBT is being swallowed whole by the very cognitive behavioral movement it helped create.
Wait, really? How does that happen?
Well, we see the proliferation of these hybrid models, things like RECBT, Rational Emotive Cognitive Behavior Therapy.
Just mashing the acronyms together.
Yeah, and the field of psychotherapy has become overwhelmingly technocratic and manualized. Insurance companies and clinical guidelines, they demand standardized, protocol-driven treatments.
Right, they want a billing code.
Exactly. They want a specific, measurable intervention for a specific, measurable symptom. They want a worksheet to reduce the frequency of panic attacks by 40% over 6 weeks.
Okay, let me jump in here. Because honestly, isn't combining therapies a good thing? It's like taking the best parts of a smartphone and a tablet to make a better device. Why is homogenization bad?
It's a fair question. But therapy isn't just hardware. It's an operating system. If you strip away REBT's philosophical operating system, you're left with disconnected apps, like techniques that don't give the client a coherent way to navigate life.
Oh, I see. So it's treating the human mind like a smartphone with a bunch of separate apps. You have a social anxiety app, a depression app, an insomnia app.
Right. And if the anxiety app is glitching, the modern therapist goes in and patches the code just for that specific app. They give you a breathing technique or a targeted cognitive reframe just for public speaking.
But the limitation of that app-based approach is that it completely ignores the underlying OS.
Exactly. If you patch the public speaking app without upgrading the underlying OS, the system is still fundamentally unstable. You might temporarily stop fearing the podium, sure.
But then it pops up somewhere else.
Right. Because your core operating system still equates external approval with human worth. So the anxiety will simply migrate. It'll show up next week as imposter syndrome or jealousy in a relationship or catastrophic fear of financial ruin.
Wow. So Ellis designed REBT as the operating system. It was never meant to be just a collection of disconnected hacks to lower your heart rate.
Not at all. It's an explicit, overarching philosophy of rational autonomy designed to guide how you navigate existence itself.
That is so profound. But okay, if REBT's value is its philosophical operating system, what exactly is that system made of? Where is the source code?
To answer that, we have to look at the 3 distinct traditions Ellis synthesized. And Takasugi dedicates a massive portion of the paper to the most critical layer.
Yeah.
The Stoic engine.
The Stoic engine. So we were talking about ancient Greeks. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius.
Yes. The foundational thesis of REBT is actually lifted directly from Epictetus' Enchiridion. He wrote, "People are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them."
Which perfectly mirrors the ABC model.
Exactly. The Stoics provided Ellis with the architecture for rational autonomy. They proposed this radical dichotomy of control.
The idea that you control almost nothing externally.
Right. You have zero control over the macroeconomy, the weather, the traffic, or the opinions of your coworkers. But you have absolute tyrannical control over your own judgments regarding those externals.
And the breakdown happens when we blur that dichotomy, right? When we try to control the uncontrollable. Ellis gave this a brilliant, if slightly controversial, name in his early work.
Oh, he certainly did.
Oh.
He called the root cause of all human emotional disturbance masturbation.
Masturbation, which is hilarious, but also kind of perfectly descriptive. Though Takasugi notes that modern academia prefers the term musty thinking nowadays.
Yes, musty thinking is a bit more palatable for the textbooks, but the mechanics are identical. It's the ontological root of suffering. taking a rational, healthy preference and mutating it into an absolute, non-negotiable demand on reality.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Musty thinking is essentially like trying to rewrite the laws of physics. It's like saying, it must not rain on my wedding day, and when it does, my brain literally breaks because reality violated my internal law.
That is the perfect analogy. Let's examine the mechanics of how a preference mutates into a demand, because this is where the actual psychological damage occurs.
Yeah, lay it out.
Okay, so a preference acknowledges the reality of the universe. I strongly prefer that my partner remains faithful to me. I will invest in the relationship. I will communicate. I'll do everything in my power to foster fidelity.
Which is totally rational.
Highly rational. It aligns with human desires for connection and safety. The mutation happens when the mind shifts from I prefer to they must.
Under no circumstances is the universe allowed to produce an outcome where I am betrayed. The laws of physics must bend to ensure my emotional safety.
Exactly. And that rigid, dogmatic must is the core pathology. Because the moment you issue a demand that you cannot actually enforce, you place yourself in a state of existential terror.
Because you're staking your survival on variables you don't control.
Right. And when reality inevitably violates that internal law, when the betrayal happens or the business fails, the musty thinking generates a cascade of secondary dysfunctions.
Takasugi outlines 3 specific secondary derivatives of that core must, right?
Yes, he does. The first one is awfulizing.
Awfulizing. Okay, what's that?
Awfulizing is the cognitive leap from this is highly disadvantageous to this is 100% bad, worse than it should be, and absolutely catastrophic.
So it's like maxing out the negative evaluation scale.
Yes. If losing a job is a 70 out of 100 on the scale of human misery, awfulizing pushes it to 101. It leaves no room for anything worse.
Wow. So if losing your job is the absolute worst thing that could ever happen, how do you even categorize terminal illness or war? It destroys all perspective.
It completely destroys perspective.
It's like treating a flesh wound like a decapitation, and your body physiologically responds to the awfulizing thought with panic, right? The cortisol spikes because your brain genuinely believes it's facing an extinction level event rather than just a severely inconvenient Tuesday.
That physiological spike is exactly what leads directly to the second derivative, low frustration tolerance, or LFT.
LFT.
LFT is the belief that because the event is awful, and because it absolutely must not be happening, I therefore cannot stand that it is happening.
I can't bear this anxiety.
Right? It's a profound underestimation of human resilience. The client genuinely believes that the emotional discomfort of the situation will literally annihilate them.
But the REBT therapist response to, I can't stand it, is honestly beautifully ruthless. They'll just say, are you currently disintegrating into a pile of ash? No. Then you are standing it.
I love that intervention. You hate it, you despise the feeling, you want it to end immediately, but you are empirically proving that you can stand it just by surviving this conversation.
It's so blunt, but so true. It forces empirical confrontation.
It really does. It forces the client to recognize their own durability. And then we have the third derivative, which is perhaps the most destructive of all, global condemnation.
Oh, this one is heavy.
It is. This is where the rigid demand turns into a sweeping verdict on human worth. Because I failed at this specific task, and I must never fail, I am therefore a fundamentally worthless human being.
Or projecting it outwards, right? Like, because you treated me poorly and you must treat me well, you are a completely rotten, irredeemable monster.
Exactly. Or projecting it onto the universe.
Yeah.
Because life gave me a raw deal and life must be fair, the entire universe is a garbage dump.
It's just the ultimate overgeneralization. You take a single data point and use it to permanently define the entire entity.
Right. And to counter this, Ellis built 3 unconditional acceptances directly on top of the Stoic concept of preferred indifference.
Preferred indifference. Let's clarify that real quick.
Sure. The Stoics believe that health, wealth, and reputation are preferred indifference. They're nice to have, of course, but they are absolutely not required to live a virtuous, flourishing life.
And Ellis translated that into USA, UOA, and ULA.
Yes. Unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, and unconditional life acceptance.
The mechanism behind unconditional self-acceptance, USA, is so vital to understand because it is not self-esteem.
Oh, definitely not. Self-esteem is highly conditional. It relies on external validation. I feel good about myself because I got an A on the test, or because I lost 10 pounds, or someone complimented me.
And the moment you fail the test or gain the weight, the self-esteem evaporates.
Exactly. USA is the conscious refusal to rate your global self at all.
Wait, not rating yourself at all? How does that work?
You rate your behaviors, your traits, your individual actions, but you refuse to give your total personhood a grade.
So you can say, my performance in that meeting was completely incompetent and I need to fix it, while simultaneously maintaining that incompetence does not subtract a single fraction of a point from my inherent worth as an alive, fallible human being.
You nailed it. It separates the sin from the sinner.
Wow. And unconditional other acceptance, UOA, applies that exact same grace to the external world.
Right. People will act unfairly, cruelly, and stupidly. You can vigorously oppose their actions, you can arrest them, you can cut them out of your life, but you accept that their existence as fallible humans guarantees they will sometimes act abominably.
So demanding that they must act well is just irrational.
Completely irrational. And finally, unconditional life acceptance, ULA, is the recognition that the universe is complex, often painful, and highly unfair. Demanding that life be easy is the surest way to make it unbearable.
But okay, let's take a step back here. Once you realize that your evaluations cause your suffering, how do you actually identify and change those evaluations?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because you can't just tell someone, hey, stop awfulizing. The brain is locked in a loop. How do you rewrite the code?
You have to look at the literal words bouncing around in your head. Takasugi points out that Ellis didn't just rely on high-minded Greek philosophy. He needed a tactical wrench to pull apart the machinery of thought.
And he found it in the general semantics movement of the 1930s.
Yes, Alfred Korzybski and S.I. Hayakawa. They propose that human beings do not interact with reality directly. We interact with our linguistic representations of reality.
Which leads to Korzybski's really famous dictum, the map is not the territory.
Exactly, meaning that the words we use to describe a situation are not the situation itself. Ellis realized that emotional disturbance is almost always a semantic error.
So the language doesn't just describe our emotional reality. The language actively constructs our emotional reality.
Yes. We treat abstract, absolutistic words as if they are physical laws. When you say, I always ruin my relationships, you're using the word always to construct a permanent, inescapable reality.
And the brain hears always and just stops looking for solutions because always implies a fixed state. The linguistic structure itself generates the despair.
Exactly. So REBT uses general semantics to aggressively interrogate the client's vocabulary.
Let's look at a specific technique from this. Takasugi highlights the technique of indexing. How does a therapist use indexing to break a client out of a global condemnation spiral? Like, say the client comes in and says, I filed for bankruptcy yesterday. I am a complete failure.
The REBT therapist immediately zeroes in on the verb am. I am a failure. That implies an ontological state. The whole being is a failure.
Right, it's global.
So the therapist introduces indexing to shatter that overgeneralization. They will say, okay, let's put a subscript on the specific event. John Sub 1 is the version of you that made a series of financial decisions leading to bankruptcy in 2026.
Okay, John Sub
1 failed at a highly specific economic endeavor. But does the failure of John Sub 1 empirically prove that John Sub 2, the total complex organism that is a father, a friend, a volunteer, a person who will exist tomorrow and the next day, is a permanent, unchangeable failure?
Oh, that is brilliant. By isolating the event with an index number, you contain the damage.
You don't deny the reality of the bankruptcy. The territory is still the territory. You still have no money.
But you fix the map so it accurately reflects the situation. A localized failure, not a global identity collapse.
Exactly.
But does swapping a word really rewire your brain? I can hear the pushback now. A client will argue, look, changing I must not go bankrupt to I strongly prefer not to go bankrupt doesn't put money in my bank account. The threat is still real.
Therapists hear that all the time.
Yeah, if I say I strongly prefer I don't get fired instead of I must not get fired, isn't that just playing semantic games with myself? It feels like slapping a polite euphemism on a disaster.
It feels like that, yes. But it is the exact opposite of a euphemism. It's a return to empirical reality. The absolute language, the must, creates a synthetic, artificial crisis on top of the actual crisis.
An artificial crisis.
Yeah. The must implies that if the bankruptcy happens, you will essentially cease to exist. That is empirically false. By changing the vocabulary to a preference, you instantly diffuse this synthetic existential threat.
Ah, I see. You lower the stakes?
Exactly. You lower the physiological arousal, the cortisol drops. And from that state of lowered arousal, you can actually deploy your rational faculties to deal with the very real problem of the empty bank account.
It moves you from a state of artificial terror back to reality, back to a state of manageable concern, because concern is highly productive. Terror is just paralyzing.
Right. REBT insists on evaluating beliefs against observable reality. If you say this is the worst thing that could possibly happen, the therapist demands proof. They force you to logically prove that the event cannot be survived.
So language precision is great, and this aggressive reliance on logic is powerful. But what happens when reality genuinely hurts?
That's the limit of logic alone.
Right, because Ellis knew it wasn't quite enough. Stoicism gives you the structural focus on what you control. Semantics gives you the linguistic tools to fix rigid thinking. But human beings still have to endure massive, unfixable grief.
We do. When the territory itself is genuinely tragic, the loss of a loved one, a terminal diagnosis, linguistic precision alone can feel pretty cold.
Yeah, I strongly prefer my loved one didn't die. It doesn't quite cut it.
No. So to handle profound disappointment and chronic suffering, Ellis incorporated a third philosophical pillar, the Eastern influence, specifically Buddhism.
This is a really fascinating layer to me because Ellis was a staunch secularist. He famously debated religious leaders. He was deeply skeptical of mysticism.
Very skeptical.
Yeah.
Yet Takasugi argues that REBT shares a profound architectural similarity with Buddhist psychology.
Specifically regarding the concept of tanha, craving, or attachment.
Right. The Buddhist diagnosis of human suffering traces the etiology back to attachment. It's not that desire for a good life that causes pain. It's the rigid, desperate clinging to specific outcomes.
So if we map this onto the ABC model, a desire is an REBT preference. Clinging is an REBT demand.
The overlap is undeniable. You can passionately desire to be healthy, you can eat well, exercise, take your medication.
But the moment you attach your entire capacity for peace to the demand that you must never get sick.
You've guaranteed your own suffering because biological decay is a universal law.
Exactly. And Buddhism introduces the concept of impermanence, Annika, accepting that all conditions, pleasant and unpleasant, are temporary.
By deeply internalizing the reality of impermanence, a person stops catastrophizing setbacks because they recognize the setback is temporary. Crucially, they also stop desperately clinging to positive states, knowing those too will pass.
Which maps perfectly onto Ellis's concept of frustration tolerance. Developing frustration tolerance is basically experiencing disappointment without concluding it is unbearable.
Yes. It's the ability to sit in the fire of a profound disappointment without concluding that the fire is your permanent home.
Think of the intense attachment a fanatic has to a sports team. You cheer, you wear the jersey, you paint your face, you experience visceral joy when they win. You have massive preference.
Massive preference, yeah.
But if they lose the championship in the final second, you experience intense disappointment. Maybe you cry, but you don't burn your house down. You don't jump off a bridge. You have cultivated a state of preference without attachment.
Preference without attachment. That's a great way to put it. You are fully engaged in the game of life, but you understand that losing the game does not annihilate you.
But I do want to contrast this with standard mindfulness because there's a big difference here. Where does REBT diverge from modern, westernized Buddhist practices?
Well, modern mindfulness, particularly the stuff derived from Vipassana, often emphasizes passive observation. You sit on the cushion, a thought arises like, I am a failure, and the instruction is simply to notice the thought, label it as a mental event, and let it float by without engaging it.
You become the sky, and the thoughts are just clouds.
Right, the passive sky. But REBT is not passive at all. REBT demands an active wrestling match with your cognition.
So you don't just watch the cloud drift by?
No, you pull the cloud down, you put it under a microscope, you dissect it with general semantics, and you aggressively dispute its validity.
You interrogate the thought. Where is the evidence that I am a failure? Does failing at this task prove I will fail at all tasks forever?
Exactly. You actively destroy the irrational belief and replace it with a newly calculated rational preference.
What's fascinating here is how Ellis created this elegant solution by integrating these three distinct philosophies. Stoicism gives you the boundary of what you control. Semantics gives you the scalpel to excise the dogmatic demands. And Buddhism gives you the deep acceptance of impermanence to tolerate the unavoidable pain.
It's a powerful triad, and it makes REBT entirely unique.
But to truly see how unique it is, we have to put it head-to-head with the other titans of psychotherapy. Takasugi forces a confrontation in Section 5 of his paper.
Yeah, the comparative analysis is essential here. We need to understand the difference between implicit and explicit philosophical assumptions. Every single therapy operates on a philosophy of human nature. but most of them hide it behind the veil of medical neutrality.
But REBT states its worldview out loud.
It does. It owns its philosophy.
Let's start with the heavyweight fight. REBT versus Aaron Beck's cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Now wait, aren't REBT and CBT basically siblings? To the general public, they seem completely indistinguishable.
They do look similar on the surface. They both focus on the present, examine thoughts and behaviors, and assign homework. But Takasugi argues the divergence is architectural.
How so?
Well, Beck's CBT was developed through empirical observation of depressed patients. Beck noticed that depressed people consistently exhibited specific cognitive errors, things like all-or-nothing thinking or mind reading.
Fortune-telling.
Right, so CBT was designed as a targeted intervention to identify and restructure those specific cognitive distortions. It presents itself as an objective, empirical, symptom-focused treatment.
It's like you have a faulty wire in the circuit regarding social interactions. Let's splice the wire and fix the circuit.
Precisely. If I go to a mechanic to fix a squeaky brake, let's say, a specific phobia of driving on the highway, the CBT therapist will use exposure and cognitive restructuring to fix that specific squeak.
They'll test the evidence. What is the actual statistical probability of crashing?
Yes. But they might never ask why you were demanding absolute 100% safety from the universe in the first place.
So if I go to the mechanic for a squeaky brake, why do I need the mechanic to teach me the entire philosophy of internal combustion?
Because REBT argues that if you just fix the squeaky brake without addressing the underlying driving habits, the core musty thinking, the client will be back in 6 months with a blown transmission.
Because the underlying demand, I must be perfectly safe at all times or life is unbearable, is still fully operational. It hasn't changed how they drive.
Exactly. It will just find a new symptom to attach itself to. Maybe the driving phobia is gone, but now they have crippling health anxiety.
So REBT's explicit philosophical education turns the client into their own mechanic for life. It engages the entire worldview.
Right. CBT teaches you to be a technician fixing a specific bug. RET wants to know your philosophical stance on uncertainty, human fallibility, and the inherent risks of existence.
Okay, what about when REBT clashes with ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy? This is a massive movement right now.
The third wave of behavioral therapy.
Yeah. ACT also pulls heavily from Eastern philosophies of acceptance. But if REBT is all about fighting the thought and ACT is all about accepting the thought, how do they reconcile?
They don't. They represent fundamentally opposing views on the role of human reason.
Really? Opposing views?
Yes. ACT is built on a philosophy called functional contextualism. It posits that trying to control, suppress, or change the content of your thoughts is not only futile, but actually amplifies psychological suffering.
Because the mind is a machine that constantly generates language, much of it negative. And ACT argues you cannot stop the machine.
Correct. So if your brain constantly generates the thought, you are an imposter and everyone is going to find out, ACT says trying to logically disprove that thought is a trap, you are just getting tangled up in the content.
So ACT focuses entirely on changing the context of the thought. Diffusion.
Diffusion, yes.
Yeah.
You alter your relationship to the cognition. You might sing the thought to the tune of Happy Birthday, or preface it by saying, I am having the thought that I am an imposter.
You strip the thought of its power to dictate your behavior, and you commit to moving toward your values while the thought is screaming in the background.
Right. And RBT looks at that and says, why are we letting the thought scream in the background when we have the rational capacity to dismantle it?
REBT leans aggressively into the Enlightenment tradition of rationalism, doesn't it?
Very aggressively. It asserts that human beings absolutely can and should evaluate the content of their cognition.
An REBT practitioner would look at the imposter syndrome thought and say, bring it to the laboratory. Let's look at the evidence. Have you been fired? Do you have the degree? Where is the empirical proof that you are an imposter?
Yes. REBT believes that successfully disputing an irrational belief structurally weakens the neural pathway that generates it. ACT believes the pathway is permanent, so you must learn to ignore it.
It's a profound clash. Combat versus surrender.
It really is.
Okay.
Now, let's look at one more paradigm. Humanistic therapy, pioneered by Carl Rogers. Person-centered therapy.
Right. This is the bedrock of what most people picture when they think of a warm, supportive therapist. It's entirely built on empathy and unconditional positive regard.
Which is great. And humanistic therapy shares REBT's deep commitment to unconditional acceptance. Both models fiercely reject the medicalization of human suffering.
They don't view clients as sick patients.
Right. But the mechanism of change is entirely inverted. Rogers believed that the therapeutic relationship itself is the sole catalyst for healing.
If the therapist provides a perfectly safe, empathetic environment, completely devoid of judgment or direction, the client's innate tendency towards self-actualization will naturally emerge.
The therapist acts as a mirror, reflecting the client's feelings back to them.
So the therapist would never say, "Your thinking here is completely illogical."
Never. That would shatter the empathy and introduce judgment. The humanistic therapist validates the emotional reality.
But REBT views the practitioner not primarily as an empathetic mirror, but as a philosophical educator.
Exactly. Empathy is necessary to build rapport, of course. But empathy alone is viewed as entirely insufficient and potentially dangerous if it simply validates irrationality.
Give me an example of that clash.
Okay, if a client says, "I have to get into Harvard or my life is utterly meaningless," the humanistic therapist might say, "I hear how much pressure you are feeling and how devastating that would be for you."
Validating the emotion.
Right. The REBT therapist, however, would say, "I accept you unconditionally, but your belief that a university admission determines your human worth is factually incorrect, and it is destroying your peace of mind." Let's break that down.
Wow. REBT prioritizes rational intervention over emotional validation.
Yes, and this is exactly why the explicitness of REBT's philosophy is so crucial. When you walk into a person-centered therapy room, you are implicitly agreeing to a worldview that prioritizes emotional expression and self-actualization.
But when you walk into an REBT room, the cards are on the table.
All the cards. The therapist explicitly states, "We value rational evaluation. We believe your thoughts are creating your suffering. We are going to aggressively dispute those thoughts."
Which provides true informed consent. You aren't just being conditioned by a hidden psychological framework. You're being invited to consciously adopt a specific articulated philosophy.
And this explicit transparency becomes even more vital when we leave the West.
Yes. If making the underlying philosophy explicit is REBT's superpower in the West, what happens when we look at therapies developed in entirely different cultural frameworks? Section 6 of Takasugi's paper explores what he calls the Eastern mirror.
This is where the paper moves from historical analysis to global application.
Yes.
And it's so important because Western psychology has a terrible habit of cultural imperialism.
Yeah, developing theories based on weird populations, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
And then exporting those theories to the rest of the world as if they are universal biological truths, secretly smuggling Western individualistic values into collectivistic cultures.
So Takasugi counters this by holding REBT up against indigenous Japanese therapies. Let's start with Morita therapy.
Morita therapy was developed by psychiatrist Morita Shuma in the early 20th century. It is deeply rooted in Zen Buddhism and completely upends the Western obsession with internal emotional control.
The foundational concept of Morita therapy is arugama, right?
Yes, arugama, which translates to accepting things as they are, or natural acceptance.
So Morita fundamentally rejects the REBT premise that we should try to change our emotions by changing our thoughts.
Completely. In Morita, emotions are treated as natural phenomena, like the weather. You cannot stop the rain by disputing it, and you cannot stop anxiety by arguing with it.
So what is the intervention? If a client is paralyzed by social anxiety and literally cannot leave the house, what does a Morita therapist do?
The intervention is entirely behavioral. Morita separates feeling from action. The therapist will instruct the client. Your anxiety is natural. Do not try to diminish it. Do not try to reframe it. Take the anxiety with you and go to the grocery store.
Wow.
Yeah.
Take it with you. So the goal is purposeful action regardless of the internal weather.
Yes.
It sounds like Morita is running a marathon while crying, and REBT is talking yourself out of crying before the race begins.
That's a really vivid way to look at it. You don't try to stop the tears in Morita. You just focus on putting one foot in front of the other.
Because REBT teaches unconditional acceptance of yourself while you actively try to change your internal reactions. Morita teaches unconditional acceptance of your internal reactions while you focus solely on your external behavior.
It is a profound divergence in the concept of control.
And we see an even starker contrast when Takasugi examines Nikon therapy, right? Developed by Yoshimoto Isshin.
Yes. Nikon is fascinating because it removes the focus from the individual entirely.
Which is wild because Western therapy is almost exclusively about the individual self. How do I feel? What are my boundaries? How can I self-actualize?
Right, but Nikon identifies that hyperfocus on the self as the very source of the pathology. Nikon is built on the Buddhist principle of radical interdependence.
Interdependence.
The therapeutic method does not ask the client to analyze their own trauma or dispute their own beliefs. It asks the client to engage in intensive, structured self-reflection based on 3 specific questions regarding their relationships with others, usually starting with their mother.
Wait, so you just isolate and reflect?
Often for a week, yes.
And what are the 3 questions?
The 3 questions are, what have I received from this person? What have I given to this person? And what troubles and difficulties have I caused this person?
Wow. And reflecting on those 3 questions in isolation forces what Takasugi calls a complete ego collapse.
It does. Western therapies often focus on how the client was wronged by their parents or society. Nikon forces the client to meticulously confront the massive debt of care they have received simply to survive.
And the inevitable pain their own existence has inflicted on others.
Yes. It heals not through empowering rational autonomy, but through cultivating profound humility, recognizing indebtedness, and generating overwhelming gratitude.
That is beautiful, but also incredibly heavy. But seriously, how does REBT fit into a world with these totally different Eastern approaches? We have REBT championing individual rational control, Morita demanding behavioral action amidst chaos, and Nikon dissolving the self into a web of grateful interdependence. Do these systems just collide and break?
This is exactly where REBT's explicit philosophical transparency saves it. If REBT pretended to be a culturally neutral medical treatment, it would fail catastrophically in a collectivistic society.
It would just be colonization.
Exactly. But because REBT's values are stated out loud, because it explicitly owns its Western, individualistic, rationalist heritage, it allows for conscious, ethical, cross-cultural dialogue.
So a practitioner in Japan can look at the REBT framework and adapt it.
Yes, they can say, the disputation of rigid demands is incredibly useful, but we must adapt the concept of unconditional self-acceptance to ensure it doesn't fracture family cohesion or social harmony. We can integrate REBT's rational analysis with Nikon's focus on interpersonal obligation.
The transparency allows for adaptation without colonization. You can only negotiate with a philosophy if you acknowledge that it exists in the first place. Which brings us to the ultimate so what for you, the listener. We have traversed ancient Greece, mid-century New York, and indigenous Japan. But if someone is listening right now while commuting or doing dishes, how do they take this massive theoretical architecture and use it?
Takasugi distills the practical relevance of REBT into 5 pillars for the modern individual.
Okay, let's hit the 5 pillars. What's the first one?
The first pillar is root cause clarity.
Root cause clarity.
The modern mental health approach of treating distinct symptoms leaves people feeling like they are playing an endless game of whack-a-mole.
Oh, for sure. You fix the insomnia, but the jaw clenching starts. You fix the jaw clenching, but the social withdrawal begins.
Exactly. REBT argues that underneath the dozen different symptoms is a single, glowing, radioactive core. The must.
The absolute demand.
Right. If a client is experiencing rage at their spouse, terror about a quarterly review at work, and deep depression about their physical appearance, REBT doesn't treat those as 3 separate pathologies. It looks for the unifying demand.
Which is usually something like, I must perform perfectly in all domains, and I must receive absolute approval from everyone, or else I am entirely worthless.
Spot on. Finding that single switch in the fuse box and flipping it from a demand to a preference simultaneously shuts down the rage, the terror, and the depression.
That is the definition of an elegant solution. One fix for multiple symptoms. Okay, what's pillar 2?
The second pillar is providing a coherent life framework. This acts as the antidote to what Takasugi calls technocratic drift.
Technocratic drift, like drifting through life using disparate coping mechanisms.
Yeah, a breathing exercise here, a journaling prompt there, but without a unifying theory of meaning. REBT gives you the overarching architecture.
It tells you exactly how to process a failure without self-hatred through unconditional self-acceptance.
And exactly how to process betrayal without consuming rage through unconditional other acceptance. It operates whether you were in a therapist's office or facing a crisis 20 years later.
Love that. Pillar 3.
Cross-cultural adaptation, which we just explored with Morita and Nikon. Because the system is explicit, it can be translated globally without erasing indigenous wisdom.
Right. Stated values allow for honest integration. Pillar 4.
Preventing fragmentation. When you treat the mind as a collection of apps, your sense of self fractures. You become the anxious person or the traumatized person.
You over-identify with the symptom.
Yes. REBT's insistence on treating the global self and refusing to rate human worth based on specific behaviors or events, reintegrates the personality.
It asserts that you are a complex, ongoing process, not just a static collection of symptoms.
Exactly. And the final pillar is ethical transparency.
Ethical transparency, meaning informed consent.
Yes. This is about your rights as a consumer of psychological information. Whether you're paying for therapy, reading a self-help book, or listening to a deep dive, you have the right to know the philosophical water you are swimming in.
You should know if a methodology is secretly asking you to prioritize your own emotional comfort over your ethical obligations to others, for example. REBT puts its values right there on the whiteboard.
It allows for an authentic adult relationship between you and the methodology. You're not being tricked into health. You're being educated into rationality.
So what does this all mean for the listener today? To operationalize this right now, if someone is feeling that familiar spike of dread or fury today, the REBT intervention isn't just to take a deep breath or to blindly accept the feeling.
No, the intervention is a brutal internal interrogation. You ask yourself, what absolute demand am I making of reality right this second? What am I insisting must or must not happen?
You locate the must. My boss must recognize my hard work. The traffic must clear up so I'm not late. My body must not feel this anxiety.
Once you isolate the rigid demand, you actively, forcefully downgrade it to a preference. You state, out loud if necessary, I intensely prefer that my boss recognizes my work. It is highly advantageous for my career, but there is no law of physics stating they must do so.
If they do not, it is frustrating. But it is not awful. I can absolutely stand it, and it does not diminish my worth. You dismantle the artificial crisis.
You step back into reality.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We watched Albert Ellis reject the slow archaeology of psychoanalysis to build a model based on conscious, present-moment responsibility.
We saw how the ABC model proves that our beliefs, not our circumstances, generate our suffering.
And we unpacked the elegant synthesis. Stoicism providing the goal of rational autonomy and the dichotomy of control. General semantics providing the linguistic precision to index our identities and excise the musts, and Buddhism providing the deep acceptance of impermanence to tolerate what we cannot change.
We saw how that explicit, unapologetic philosophy distinguishes REBT from the symptom management of CBT, the functional contextualism of ACT, and the empathy-only approach of humanistic therapy.
And we saw how stating those values out loud allows for profound, ethical, cross-cultural integration with Eastern models like Merida and Nikon. It's a dense, demanding system.
It is. But the Takasugi paper leaves us with a final, lingering thought that I think perfectly encapsulates why this matters right now.
What's the final thought?
Professor Takasugi forces us to confront our modern obsession with psychological convenience. We download apps to track our moods. We seek out 30-second somatic resets on social media. We desperately want automated, frictionless relief from our discomfort.
We want the quick fix.
But Takasugi asks a chilling question. Are we utilizing these endless technical protocols merely as a sophisticated way to avoid the terrifying, deeply human work of actually deciding what our personal philosophy of life should be?
Oh, wow. We are using the life hacks to hide from the existential void.
Precisely. We treat our minds like machines that just need a software patch, rather than recognizing ourselves as philosophical agents capable of profound self-determination. Ellis's ultimate warning was that if you do not consciously choose your philosophy of life, you will inevitably adopt a dysfunctional one by default.
You'll absorb the irrational demands, the awfulizing, and the conditions of worth dictated by a chaotic society. You cannot escape having a philosophy. You can only escape having a rational one.
You can't just slap a cognitive band-aid on a broken worldview. You have to do the hard, unglamorous work of examining your own code. You have to hunt down your musts and drag them into the light.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take the time today to interrogate the demands you are making on the universe. Strip away the absolute language, dispute the awfulizing, and embrace the profound, resilient freedom of preferring. We will catch you on the next deep dive.